And it's showtime. Greetings to the viewers and people who stop in to view later. Already got a few people lurking. Welcome, as always. And you're watching from the Tomes on Twitch. You can also find us on YouTube, Fox and Board Games, and foxandboardgames.com as our landing pad. Social media, which will soon be increased in volume. Fox and Board Games. And again, big thanks to everyone who shows up to just watch, to chat, who likes and subscribes and supports. It means a lot to me. It keeps this stream going. And hopefully will assist in keeping the game publishing going once I get that fully up and running. Next year is the goal to start the actual publishing. Assuming I can get this game done and collaborators can get other games done. Life does not intervene. But that's where I'm at. I'm on track with that. At least as far as I know. A little bit of classic art inspiration. Romans and the Gauls. Topic which is of interest to me considering my recent tours of Gallic Germany and the clash between the Gallic tribal cultures that were there and the Roman imperial culture, city-state culture, which is kind of the topic for tonight. Yeah, there's a bunch more viewers just jumped in. Greetings. Started on time tonight, imagine that. I was ready to go. As always, feel free to stop in and give a chat or just lurk. I'll just do my usual for Wednesday night Tavern chat. I'll talk a little bit about kind of my inspiration for this and then bounce off what people are talking about in the chat. So this chat, I was going to do a Halloween chat of some sort tonight, but I covered horror quite a bit last year. Starting around this time and then going through the winter as my Call of Cthulhu game commenced. Unfortunately, I'm not Call of Cthulhu in progress right at this moment. I do have something in the works that will be a public play scenario that I plan to host on Roll20, and of course I'll play it with my regular groups too to have fun with it and test it out, but didn't really have anything Cthulhu-ish or vampire-ish or horror gaming-ish set for tonight to go, so I decided to just kind of bounce off where I've been this week, or my brain has been this week. And those of you who've tuned in throughout the week, and you know that I usually do design and work chats Monday afternoon, Tuesday morning ish. I've been pushing that a little bit towards noon recently, and that's actually been working, I think, a little better. And Thursdays I generally run about 11 or noon for a couple hours. And then Fridays have been really popular. When I've tuned in Friday afternoons, I've definitely gotten a pretty strong response. And even the Friday night that I came on, I had maybe half a dozen people, some of whom had never seen the channel before, log on, which was great. So I might start doing a little bit on Fridays too, depending on how the rest of my schedule goes. But for this week, I've been focusing on continuing with the religion and spirituality portion of the game. Something that's been long neglected. There were only footnotes as to what these various cultures believed and their ways of worship. And as I've talked about here, we talked about religion a little bit last week, and that was an extremely popular chat. It's all archived here and on YouTube, here for now, and on YouTube. And it's a huge topic. We did not even, I think Wolfie, who's probably lurking around tonight, said, that was just like, that didn't even really begin to discuss it. And I no, we didn't even put a ripple in the pond. We didn't even Hey, there he is. There's Wolfie. The pond that is this discussion of how to treat this in RPGs, we didn't even ripple the surface. I mean, it's such a deep topic. It's such a big topic. And it's treated, as we discussed last week, extremely superficially. And there's Justin. Good evening. Good evening, Jay. See if the Nightbot bans you again. I think I turned that setting off. Started to do a Hal from Space Odyssey, 2001 Space Odyssey, and started taking over my channel and doing strange things to my viewers, banning people rampantly and blocking words and things like that. That was really amusing a few weeks ago. It's like it banned J Soundscape. What is going on? That was hilarious. Um, so this idea of religion is usually treated so superficially, and I talked about that a lot last week. How most players, especially modern players, just kind of they compartmentalize it like religion's compartmentalized in day-to-day modern Western life. It's this thing that's there that might infuse some aspect of belief into their life, but with rare exceptions, it doesn't govern life. And the more you study ancient cultures in our real world, up through the Middle Ages, even through the Renaissance, because we're all taught that, oh, at the Renaissance, everybody became enlightened and believed in science instead of religion. Well, clearly, if we take a look at modern day Western culture, that's not true. First of all, that's patently not true. Even in modern America, or maybe I would maybe say especially in modern America, if we're talking about the modern West, maybe some Mediterranean cultures in South America as well, where religion still plays this extremely dominant cultural role. But for those of us who live, let's say, in the Northeast of America, religion is this very compartmentalized of experience. Maybe on the West Coast or in Chicago, it's this very compartmentalized experience. Whereas in ancient cultures, this was definitely not the case. And it didn't matter what culture you were talking about, I've thought about how to organize these chats too. And as you know, sometimes I've thrown out like this kind of trolling topic, and I just let people say whatever they want, and kind of let it go off topic, and that's fine. I certainly don't mind doing that. But I've definitely tried to, rein in the topics, and I think I think I'm going to treat this as a presentation for the first half hour, where I just throw out what I've been doing in my findings. Now, if you want to talk about ancient spiritual practices and how what effectively is this obsession with the afterlife or the unseen world, because that's what all religions basically boil down to, even if they impact our day-to-day conduct, even as far back as the Egyptians, this idea of your soul being weighed, in this culture that was for its time considered extremely advanced, progressive, they were obsessed with what happened after. And these gigantic monuments were built to ensure the pharaohic ascension, into the fields, into the holy fields, the enlightened realm, versus being stuck wandering around this world or the underworld, or having your soul devoured, as was if you really screwed up. So even though we tend to think of ancient cultures as also maybe compartmentalizing or not, or that these religions and spiritual practices do not impact their daily life, we are totally inaccurate in that. Let's start off by a little work share, which I think is above the image. So there's my religion and spirituality document, but let me just jump over to my browser. Oh, well, it's open in Chrome. Maybe if I looked in the right browser, I would find it, right? So, we have confirmed that Neanderthal people had spiritual practice, and this intersects directly with today's talk. No, really, National Geographic. I'm sure there's another. That's still National Geographic. Geographic. So, similar article. Here is confirmation. Of course, now we have ads, right? Boy, the internet. We used to joke around. We joked around 30 years ago. The minute you have to get through ads to read internet content, the internet has failed, right? And it wasn't 5 years later. Not 5 years later that this was the case. Um, you know, and there's been a lot of debate over Neanderthal burials. How much of it was functional? How much of it was religion? And there is significant evidence now, or spirituality. There is significant indicator now that burials, of course, were performed for practical reasons. They were performed so that there was, no remnant of the human dead around for a number of reasons. Reasons that obviously are psychologically impacting. I mean, unlike some cultures that keep their, they keep the dead remains of ancestors around. But in the case of the Neanderthal, we're also assuming they were somewhat nomadic, so you couldn't just keep taking these corpses with you. But now there's increasing evidence that this was not only done, but due to the positioning of bodies, the inclusion of grave goods, the addition of ornamentation like flowers, it's pretty possible. It's pretty likely that this was being done in some sort of reverent, spiritually based practice. Now, did the Neanderthals believe technically in an afterlife? There's Peach. Oh yeah, that's yes. Running. Speaking of horror, two episodes of Guillermo del Toro's horror anthology. Yes, we have that, and that's in the queue. That is in the queue. We're getting all our Halloween in, and that is definitely. I mean, I watch horror all year round, of course, and that is definitely in the queue. But yeah, I'm sure it's good. I mean, you know, Pan's Labyrinth. How could it not be? Still not sure if I'm happy or upset that he didn't get roped into Mountains of Madness. That just looked like such a mess. I mean, of course, I'd love to see a good Mountains of Madness, but I don't think so. I don't know. People telling me they're viewing. So hello, viewers. Hello, Neil and whoever else has jumped on. So we're talking about light bulbs. No, we're not talking about light bulbs. We're talking about these primitive culture burials and as it ties into spiritual practice. And this is directly related to the work I've been doing this week. And there's Blitzwolf. How are you? So there's Neil. So last week I spent time. Let me jump over to that. Curzon's not on, which is good because there's actually something in this document that could be a spoiler. Not really. It's so minor. I'm glad that Curzon's not on for the reasons he's not on. He's getting some life stuff done. But it's too bad he's not. So, again, this idea that religion is compartmentalized and always has been, and that it's this invention of the feeble-minded, to explain things they don't understand, which that's obviously partially what religions are. The fact that Neanderthals and then later the cultures, the Hallstatt culture and the Proto-Celts that inhabited central Germany, their burial finds and their cave paintings certainly indicate, and a lot of cave paintings are still a lot of debate. Many of them are thought to simply be documentation or representation of hunts and the sun and things like that they saw around them. But there is definitely a mystic element to some of these petroglyph and cave finds. They were definitely geared towards existing in a state besides the physical. And again, it's only in the modern West that this has become so compartmentalized. If you go to parts of Southeast Asia, if you go to the Middle East, And I'm not even just talking about the state religion fundamentally enforced aspects of the Middle East, areas of the Middle East. Neanderthals have flamethrowers? Well, that would be a whole different thing. Maybe they could be Cannibal Corpse guitarists. I don't know. It's one of my favorite Cannibal Corpse stories. Got raided with a meth lab and two military grade flamethrowers, and yeah, maybe Neanderthals would have had that if they could have. Anyway, the National Geographic wanted me to sign up. So this is CBCCA, a Canadian news and research site. So if anyone's interested, you can read a little bit more about this. But where I think I was really going to go with this, for those of you who didn't see it, there's my backdrop: the Romans and the Gauls, the clash of city state, and the clash of culture. In this religious and spirituality document, the first bulk of what I've been working on was the Rubari culture, and again, I have variously described them, for lack of a better word, Babylonian, Egyptian esque, Hindu esque, and there are elements of all those things that I have wrapped into this culture, this Near Eastern culture. But they're gods and goddesses and beings, and by the way, they're dualistic beings who are not only singular gendered, because again, this concept of deities being singularly gendered is fairly new in the world of spirituality. I mean, again, we have evidence that even Odin in his tribal form was seen as or Odin was seen as a dualistic being. There's a lot I could get into the rabbit hole of that, and of course, this really upsets certain Norse neo pagans who are fixated on the macho end of all this. You know, well, and also I would point out that pre-Christian contact, it's believed there was a lot more ancestor worship and totemic worship among the Scandinavians, the early Scandinavians. So, again, these things all kind of repeat. I know PJ's talked about the Viking-esque culture that he's working on in his game that has a lot of these same traits as the Frore. That brings us to tonight's topic, the tribal culture. So, I tend to find, and again, I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not a trained anthropologist, I'm not a trained religious or studies or folklore person, though I do pretend to be one in real life. And I know quite a few, actually. Some colleagues that I talk to the most are philosophers, anthropologists, religious studies people, and folklorists. I don't know if Ristandi is the name, or Steve is from Vermont, has ever tuned into one of these channels, but this is literally his job, is to study all this stuff and folkloric and mystical aspects of things. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't even go for the Santa Jason Trickster God. I like that. I don't even go to Trickster God. I mean, he was at points adversarial. He plays in some respects the same role that Luciferian or Satanic figure. Well, not Luciferian. Lucifer's about to fall and claiming your own kingdom. I would argue that would be Lokian, but even I don't really ascribe to that. But some of these satanic thoughts, these ideas of the early idea of Satan as the adversary from the old Hebrew, this person who challenges you. And the gender fluidity is Promethean, yes, Promethean in many aspects. The gender fluidity is definitely there. It's definitely there. It's there through his study that he is the only of one of the gods who knows the Scythe, who knows the witchcraft of the ancient Scandinavians, which there's a lot of discussion if that actually came from the Sami or the Finns, but that's a whole other can of worms that I won't even get into tonight. But in that culture, the only people who could do that are women. So it's really interesting that this war god, this Teutonic, um, yeah, very good description. Yes. Satan is God's prosecuting attorney. Absolutely. Yeah, he takes you to task. That was the original role of the adversary. And yeah, I know a lot of folks who are deep into the Norse neo-paganism who probably, I mean, all the ones that I'm really close with are totally cool with Odin being gender fluid. That's not even a like a, yeah, of course, maybe, right? I mean, even Thor. There are several representations of Thor throughout the various cycles that he takes on the form of a woman, either in jest or to do something he has to do. So again, this is a whole other topic we can get into. That see how many feathers get ruffled because of it. But for that reason, there's also a lot of evidence that the Proto-Indic tribes and the Indo-European tribes influenced everything from modern Hinduism to Scandinavian and Celtic religions. So they, the Proto-Indic tribes, as far as we can tell, if we can look at the Indian pantheon as or the Hindu pantheon as inspiration, there is a lot of fluidity going on there of all varieties. So I included that. The sun god is a dual god. It is Slune is a both a male and a female being. A female being in the winter that carries the seed of the summer throughout the year. And then in the summer he becomes this jolly kind of almost Green Man-ish or, Summer King type figure for these people. Now these are the Rubari. These are the ones that have their monumental temples and their thousands of years of belief. Hyper buff hunchback alpha male Chris Helmsworth clone. I really love Chris Helmsworth as Thor. I have no issue with that representation, with the comic book representation, or the very post the romantic revival representation of these gods and goddesses. And again, I just don't have any issue with it anyway until you start using it as a reason to discriminate against other types of people. Which again, fortunately all the people I know who are into these scenes don't do that. And I have excised people from my life who have the macho, toxic masculine Aryanism going on. I have no time for that. I have no time for that. Yes, the Ultra Himbo Thor is perfectly acceptable, and I'm very amused by it. But you know what? In a lot of the sagas, he is like that too. He is a bro. He is this dude. He's the dude that shows up at the party and drinks all the beer and maybe starts a fight with someone, but he's not a horrible person in and of himself. He'll also go and fight for these same people and get into a brawl with them or on their side. So again, he is one of those figures. But when it comes to my own tribal culture, I carefully avoided all those stereotypes. So moving on to that, there's a little more of that. Yeah, exactly. Right. That's pretty much, unless you're a troll, then he just obliterates you. And again, trolls in their culture were also sorcerers and giants and these other sorts of mythical beings. Kind of all came under the banner of troll one time or another, but yeah, I mean, for all these reasons, all trolls are bastards. Yeah. For all these reasons, I included things like these dualistic beings, and gender dualistic beings, in particularly the Rubari pantheon. There's some that are distinctly male identified and female identified for a reason. There's a reason they personify something that I felt was only appropriate to give them the specific gender. But there's quite a few that I've listed, that I'm like, well, I mean, they're represented as both. And we know that a lot of primitive harvest gods. Now, the lesser mythical deities and mythical beings of the Rubari, which is the city-state culture, are in fact mostly from their agrarian roots. This is also historical. We know this from every culture that we can trace, that if you started out as agrarian, these beings, which are often personifications of the soil, the wheat harvest, the river, often become minimized later when city-states rise and human life, or when daily life becomes more human-centric. And not that it isn't human-centric in the eyes of humans, but obviously, If you're in a city, if you're a townie and you've never tilled a field in your life, you don't have that relationship to these beings. I mean, I even have like the lizard snake, the personification of the mangrove, and that's not even anything that's remotely human. That's a it's a giant snake that the people who live in the mangroves pay homage to. I won't say worship, pay homage to, much in the way that I think I mentioned last time. Tibetan monks deal with demons. They leave it stuff so it goes away, and they don't have to be bothered by it. So let's see. So then there are the Frore. So I had to really think about how to develop this culture. Now, as a backstory, they are this tribal culture that lived they were one of the first cultures to come to this land from let's say, a steppes, or a Russian steppes esque land to the north that they variously describe as a land to the north or an island. And the people that still inhabit that place, and this is where PJ and I talked a little bit earlier this week, their ancestors that still inhabit this place are described as giants. So that again feeds into some other folklore that PJ and I talked about earlier this week in terms of idea of being ancestored or born of giants or titans or similar types of beings. And all the four are very large. And that's the one thing I describe them as. And if people have asked me, well, like, what's their cultural root? Are they like the Norse? Are they Scandinavian like? No, they're more like tribal Hungarian, the Hungar tribes that we've been able to glean some bits of culture from. But anyway, they were chased out of their happy mountain homes and forest homes by demonic creatures. Just simply, I'll leave it at that. There's a lot more to it, obviously, but so now they live in this kind of isolated north and west forested area of the New Territories, and they unfortunately have had to integrate into many local towns. At least some of them have. Some of them still retain this tribal root. So when you start thinking about developing this tribal culture and how it differs from the city-state culture, and you start thinking about their spirituality, I decided right off the bat that they would have basically 3 tiers of spiritual belief. They have these animal totems. Oh, did I call it that? Oh, that's not that. That's not that. Haha. Okay. I'll get to that in a minute. So the animal totems are the spiritual archetypes of these animals that this culture existed alongside. And in fact, several of the animal totems are now extinct. They're animals that are extinct. I mean, obviously you have your raptor birds. Now again, I went through a lot of debate this week. Do I make up animals for this world? Do I make up the entire ecosystem? I mean, yes, a perfect world, that would be optimum. But there's 2 challenges to this. One, it's a huge amount of extra work for me right now when I'm trying to get a book done. Which, I'm not shirking work, but I kind of have a deadline. So it's like to go and 2, when you see deer in a field that the characters are traversing through, does the game master really want to have to spend even not 30 minutes, but even a minute describing how these animals that are effectively deer are deer, but they're not really like our deer, and having this lavish description of, or should you just say deer-like animals? And the players and the characters in this world will automatically equate. So my end result was to kind of adapt concepts of animals, both extinct and living in our own world, and just say something generic like raptor bird, right? And it can be a raptor bird. And I even have a note in here in describing animals. And I talk about this. And obviously this will appear. I wrote this here so that I could actually remember what I was thinking later when I come up with the bestiary. Um, and you know, this is the word for these raptor birds. And this is the name of the totem of the raptor bird. And this is also the name of the clan who was born into the raptor birds clan. So all of their spirituality and their ancestral lineage are tied together right here. They're all tied to this totemic animal. And again, it has to be differentiated. And I had a little bit of discussion with this week. Our modern idea of a totem animal is also like a power animal or an animal companion, a spirit animal companion. And that's not necessarily what totem animals were historically. Totem animals, in some ways, were the archetype of that animal in the animal kingdom. And they didn't necessarily concern themselves with things like human companionship. And this idea of spirit animals and totem animals, as it is described, let's say in Native American culture or in Tungus culture or something like that, is actually a little bit departed from what we normally think of when we think of, my power animal, my spirit animal in the New Age philosophy sense. Which again, I don't doubt that either, and I talk frankly in one of my other chats about my own experiences in these territories with a guided vision of totem animal or spirit animal interaction. And these range from things that I can describe relatively simply and that are analogous and are still existing in this world at that time, to things like dire wolves, which, I've talked a lot about megafauna playing a part in this game. But, for example, I also have cave bears. One of the major totems is a cave bear. And it's mostly extinct. Excuse me. If there are these cave bears around in this world right now, they are mostly extinct. So this is a throwback. This is a throwback from this culture's very early development and their early contact with the animal world. And again, this idea of people attaching their very lineage and their spiritual belief to animals in our modern world, where we factory farm and people hunt for fun instead of out of necessity, and we can buy pets at a pet store. It's very difficult for us to understand just how different even this relationship is to animals, where animals were seen as equals or superiors, versus even the treatment of this in the Rubari culture, where the mangrove swamps, the spirit of the mangrove swamps, manifests as this kind of dragon-like creature. It's this kind of giant serpent. Or let's say the treatment of the Naga in Hindu mythology, and there are Naga-like beings in this world. So I had to keep in mind that these people consider themselves very close to these animals. And yes, there will be a system in place at some point where you can buy gifts for your character that allow them to manifest aspects of their clan's totem. And again, I started working on that and I realized it was basically a whole new magic system slash spirituality system. And I just shelved it. I said, you know what? That's supplement material, or maybe after the rest of the book's done, if I can work up and give even a basic framework for it in this copy, I will. So there are, like I mentioned here, the wolves in this land can be striped and spotted. They can be colored in strange ways, because don't forget, you're under a red sun as well, so vegetation's colored differently. Most green vegetation's black, some of it's purple. So these creatures are going to look different. And by the way, I got to speak to my artist Joseph a little bit yesterday. He's hoping to get back to some of this soon. He's doing a very prestigious coursework and internship right now with some really well-known artists, and of course that's priority. So But once he gets back, I'm going to be like, yeah, give us some black and purple spotted wolves, black and purple spotted dire wolves. I think that'll be really cool. Raptor birds with bright green and bright blue coloration, and maybe red coloration to match the sunset. But then I have smaller. I have other totems that I haven't detailed yet. I'll get to this tomorrow. Elk-like creatures, these small sparrow-like birds, and I wanted these different totems to personify different aspects of the culture that these people could embrace. And that, frankly, I think players will have fun playing, because let's face it, we all want to play like, a stag or a bear or a wolf shapeshifter at some point, And yeah, there's going to be, maybe not full shapeshift, not Werewolf the Apocalypse, but there's going to be aspects of that in the game. And there are already a few aspects of that in with the Primeval Magic, but I stayed away from it because I want to keep that exclusive to this system. But I even thought things like honeybees, right? Modern civilization is largely built on honey, or ancient civilization, which became modern civilization, is largely built on honey and several different and bees. And bees were worshipped all throughout the ancient world. And Greeks had entire temples to the bee goddesses, And I kept a lot of the very common creatures that you might want to see, like a raven-like bird, a lynx-like cat. And I had to think, okay, well, this is going to be so radically different from how spirituality and magic or mysticism, let's say, is treated in a city-state. So then and in developing this culture, I had to think about people that moved around a lot. I had to think about people who relied on at one time, and we talked about this earlier, that this idea of everybody worship bears, except Nicolas Cage, yeah. Everybody worship bears. I mean, there's some really interesting commonalities. Wolves, too. The first evidence of wolf worship, I mean, aside from images on caves, but there weren't as many wolves there as you would think. The wolf clans that were predecessors to the Golden Horde, that came out of modern day Southern Asia. They had wolfskin banners and wolf heads on their outfits, and sometimes the horses. So it's really interesting that the wolf is another very connective, primitive being among many different cultures. And I can maintain, considering I have this Arctic dog laying next to me that's regularly mistaken for a wolf, the kind of obsession with animals like this are enduring, and bears too. And wild boars. I tried to stick with the big ones that are fairly common throughout most real world cultures. But these people also have the big difference that, and we talked about this a little bit before, their social mores are extremely different than the people who live in the city. What's the quote from Robert E. Howard? A savage can be assumed to be more polite than a civilized person, because the civilized person can speak against you without having their head bashed in, or something to this effect. I mean, it was very, let's see, is this the quote? It was very Robert E. Howard, very Conan, but basically saying, there were certain cultural, oh God, not the bees, yeah. There were some very specific cultural mores in place in these societies to prevent casual violence. Because casual violence was a reality, because life was very tough. Whereas the city person can definitely treat certain people, like I've even talked about that in the city, there is a caste system. So the players have had to understand how a caste system works. Yet, if they go and they spend time among the Frore tribes, they're going to have to understand that keeping their word's a really, really big deal. Let's see. A really, really big deal. That not keeping your word is even more than in a business environment in the city. It's life or death. Offering someone hospitality is life or death in these cultures. It is extremely different from top to bottom about how the interactions with both the other people, natural world, animals all occur. The average person walking around Magrelin does not have to be worried about generally have to be worried about being eaten by a large cat, whereas a person living in the mountains does. So this whole concept of nature will be very different for these people. So the one thing that every one of my cultures so far has been ancestor spirits. And again, this is another hot button topic among certain scholars that certain cultures didn't have ancestor worship because there was no real evidence of it. There were no active ancestor shrines, etc., etc. I tend to totally dismiss that. Even though I've just said I'm not a scholar in these. I mean, every culture that we have much record of has some aspect of a veneration or elevation of their dead. So the four naturally also have the closest thing that starts to hedge on this kind of absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right? Exactly. This is the closest thing they have on to the kind of Celtic gods and goddesses, the Norse gods and goddesses, is they have an ancestor pantheon, which I'm not sure how much I'm going to get to detail this right now. I'm going to definitely name a few. But, each clan's going to have this whole host. Maybe there are some mutual, tribal, community, cultural ancestors. 100. Absolutely 100%. But each clan is also going to have each one of these different groups within the tribes is going to have this developed pantheon of ancestral heroes. Now, that's something that almost every one of these cultures in this world has to one degree or another. Well, no. Basically, no, I just lied. Flat out, these guys in the Hapshar. Now, the Hapshar, again, are these kind of Melnibonéan, post-Roman, fallen, decayed empire, Harkonian culture, this kind of corrupt culture. So their idea of ancestor worship is actually very different. I mean, they literally build these shrines to their ancestors as well. These are ancestors who all progressed their house monetarily in warfare. Do they really believe their ancestors get up from these shrines and walk out among them in their city of Nakarth? Probably not. Probably not. It's probably closer to a sainthood or a veneration of relics than it is the Frore, who quite literally believe, perhaps in the same way that the early Teutonic tribes, the Germanic tribes, which, would eventually interact with or become or come from the Scandinavians, where they quite literally believed that their ancestors had become heroes and gods. And in fact, we do believe that that's where a lot of our common Norse, Celtic, Germanic gods and goddesses came from, is they were originally real people that became elevated to this deified status through their tales and legends. So this is the one place where you might have your Thor-like figure or your Odin-like figure or your Freya-like figure among the Frore, that they would have taken one of their ancestors and lifted them up. But also on the other side of this are the Siaka, the shades. These are the troubled spirits. All the things that ghosts are made of. Having been betrayed, having unfulfilled requests or missions, being lost, literally or figuratively in life, having lost their honor. All these things that we have, the Scandinavian tales of the Draugr, and there are some fantastic Scandinavian ghost stories. Not even the tales of the Draugr who inhabit the mounds, and that would occasionally come out and terrorize people, but actual ghost stories. And what's interesting is so many of the Scandinavian ghosts take some sort of fleshy form, and they're really creepy. Yeah, they're great. They're these really early ideas of wights. The Barrow-wights and the even vampire qualities of vampire-like creatures, which we know are also common throughout all Europe, that are literally the dead who have come back to haunt the living and drain the living in some way, shape, or form. They have these as well. So this is kind of where we start to intersect with that sort of folklore, and where that kind of folklore can be brought into this culture. Now, on the other hand, the Rubari have the Predka, which are Indian spirits of children who died hungry. And in fact, they feature it in one of the scenarios that I ran for the group as part of the longer campaign, where they get to this mountain keep and they can't leave at night because of these hungry undead children that are out lurking around. And it's not a zombie game where they could just go out, oh, we're just going to cleave through them. These were also supernatural creatures, and it was extreme. The characters realized very quickly how dangerous they were. First of all, there were a lot of them. Second of all, they had command over mind, command over shadows, all these things that we attribute to restless dead. So again, that's this kind of counterpoint where you have this citified culture, this culture that has 3,000 years of urban history, still has these beliefs. And even in the city of Agrolin, there are places where they still leave these temple offerings out for the Preka in a more formalized fashion. Maybe they don't really roam around the city at night, or maybe they do, but it just made me think of Poppy Z. Bright's Calcutta story, the zombie story in Calcutta, which is fantastic. It's really grotesque and really creepy, and it ties in Hindu mythology with zombies, and it's modern Calcutta, only at night there are zombies roaming around. But they're not just dumb, mindless shambling undead. They're more like ghouls, the traditional Arabic or Indonesian ghoul that is this, kind of wily lurking monster in the shadows. And it's a really cool story. I don't remember the name of it. I read it probably 30 years ago, but it was a really cool story. I was like, this is really interesting. A really interesting take on the genre. But I don't want to see it as a movie. Actually, the movie The Dead. Let's talk a little bit of horror since we're near Halloween. It's an African zombie movie. It's pretty interesting. I mean, it's not brilliant filming. It's not brilliant in any way, but it is interesting seeing how in tribal and rural Africa zombies are treated. It's quite an interesting take. It starts to touch a little bit more on how zombies were originally conceived of. And it gets into the idea of the zombie as an ancestor, a dangerous ancestor, which this is what the shades in this culture act like. Then there are the 10. There are these magical creatures. These are the creatures that in other worlds would become unicorns or dragons or fairies. That they are beings that the Furor believe inhabit the woods, and that they are not of this world. They are not human. They never were. They are these otherworldly beings that have come to intersect with our reality and interact with people for good or for ill. So this is the kind of fairy tale-ish aspect, and I don't have a lot of that in this game because it is more sword and sorcery. It is more, it is more about these kind of decayed and emerging cultures. Well, right, and Neil, we've talked about this that Fear the Walking Dead was on such the right track for like a season, for like 2 or 3 seasons, and it was so interesting, and that it had this. Let's look at zombies and let's take them and put them in this different culture and think about how a different culture will treat them, and then of course they totally just the whole franchise just went right downhill, spiraling down into the gutter. No, even though I watched it pretty much up until 2 years ago, regularly, it's still at points I was just like, all right, this has to end. But that's a whole other story. But right, in treating these beings, especially in this tribal culture, they do take on a different form. As far as actually building up the tribal culture, let's jump over to that document. Because I did say I was going to talk about that tonight. Again, there is so much to talk about with all of this in culture and how these cultures differ and how they impact and intersect and how they're a lot like our own cultures, but not. History. close that out. And then, so let's see. There's my timeline. Only 300,000 years of human history. That's not much. Renewal, blah, 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 blah. The rhubarb, blah, blah. I had the four. Arnek, Hapshar. That's right. I have this divided into landed and non-landed. So, the four fall into the non-landed people. And I'm kind of dropped these. These were some early classifications. This document was written over 2 years ago. So these people do have strongholds. They do have basically wood fort cities, hill fort cities that are common even among our own very early, our own early populations, pre-Roman, and we have evidence of these, and we have descriptions of these. And they have a pretty significant trading and crafting culture. They're very large. They have bronze skin, very big stature, as I've said. People of the Ati. They tend to have white hair. White to kind of orange, red color hair, with quite a few have black streaks in the hair. And almond-shaped eyes, dark almond-shaped eyes. And despite looking very blocky and very thick, they actually have, as I described, very high and delicate cheekbones. And here I talk a little bit about the family clans. So the big thing one of their big obsessions is boundary and personal and communal territory. So this is something, I remember standing at Stonehenge, with a friend of mine, who was an English friend of mine who toured us around England for a week, 20 years ago now or more. And, we were looking at these stones and he said, you have to understand these people were at least as smart as we were. They were at least as smart as we were. They just didn't have the physics and they didn't have the tools, right? And it's true, when you really think about that. Anthropology is tough, and it's becoming tougher for people to understand as we become more disconnected to nature, disconnected from nature, disconnected from our own history, our own ancestries. And it's... So one of the things I've gotten, and I was thinking about this today, and I was kind of laughing about it, both in regards to the choice of names I've had for several of my creative projects, music projects, sound projects, art installations, and this game, is I've had people actually say, well, shouldn't the names be easier to pronounce? And I'm like, okay, I get it. But if you want a level of integrity in whatever you're developing, especially if you're claiming that you're going to have this unique culture, and this goes back to the discussion of D&D races being basically humans with different masks or funny ears or pig faces or dragon heads or whatever, in the way they're most often treated in an RPG. And I understand that, especially in D&D, a lot of what you're there for is this power fulfillment, this fun experience, this group experience. The cultural intricacies of dwarves will probably be very interesting to very few people. However, in this world, because I don't have those demi-humans, because it's culturally human-centric, and will always be culturally human-centric, I had to really make each of these people deep. And I had to come up with naming conventions and linguistic conventions, not whole languages, because I'm not personally academically equipped to do that, but at least conventions that make them unique. Such as I use Hungarian as a base, early Hungarian as a base for their language. And that gives them a little bit of a different feel than if I had chosen, Celtic or Scandinavian, which are much more familiar to us. I wanted them to seem to be people from somewhere else. I wanted them to be this kind of tribal culture that had these elements of familiarity, yet we're a little alien, both in their appearance. Their belief system is actually not so far off from most early or indigenous belief cultures. I think I used the word primitive a couple minutes ago, and I hate using that word to discuss tribal people because it's a negative connotation. So I already talked about the religion. So I make them a little bit xenophobic too, and a little bit xenophobic in the sense that they still believe clan, family, is the only thing you can really rely on because that's what their world has taught them. That's what their culture has taught them. And it's not that they inherently dislike other types of people. I mean, they may individually they may, but as a culture, they still take this idea of and this is something that's common in almost all tribal cultures. I'd even say modern tribal cultures. The other, the if we're going to use the Scandinavian terms, Inengard Utengard, inside, outside. Outside is the woods. Outside is the mountains. Outside are the trolls. Outside are those other people with their strange ways. But I've joked about this with people that, the most dangerous people are the ones that live in the next town, right? Those people that are like you, but they're not quite like you. They live in the next village. And it's funny, whenever I go to Europe, I still see this, particularly where I spend a lot of time in rural, still very very rural southern Germany, that there are people who including my partner, whose family in this very small town can trace their roots back to the late medieval era. Some of the people there can trace it back even further. And that town is still the Innengard. It's your part. And then recently there's been a whole like 50 or 100 people who have moved in from outside, and they're the outsiders. Those people on the other side of the old wall are the newcomers. And it's not that different here. I've lived in several small towns. I live in a very rural minded and geographically small community right now, and there still is that, oh, you're not one of the people from around here. Whereas several of my neighbors all went to high school together, and again, there's not a gang war going on or anything, I don't think, but there still is this sense of distance, this sense of separation. So it is interesting, and I think that speaks to tribal culture too. And we don't even have to go to the woods of a fantasy world. We can walk down our streets, and I think we see this in urban environments, right? What are gangs but tribal assemblages? And gang has this negative connotation now, but it was originally even everything from Irish gangs to the Cosa Nostra, or at least the origins of the Cosa Nostra, to various other ethnic gangs. In many ways, they were ways that originally communities protected themselves from corrupt authority and kept a sense of community identity as their neighborhoods radically changed. And I would argue that that's still the case today. I understand that's still a tribal expression today. Just taking a look, see if there's anything else I wanted to cover for tonight. Again, we've only scratched the surface. So who wants to talk about some of their stuff? Some of their creations? I know P just got a kind of a whole parallel development in his own D&D game, which is kind of interesting. So and also welcome to all the viewers who have just been watching but not chatting. Thanks for coming on. Feel free to say hi or don't. Either way. So we also have the Melkor and other tribal people, but I'll talk about them when I develop them a little bit more. They're more of a nomadic tribal people, horse clans, horse culture. But I thought the four would be interesting to work on now as a complete counterbalance to the Rubari, who, as I've said, are very, very ancient city-state-ish. And even the idea of trade, this whole idea of trading, I think, in these two cultures is going to be extremely different. Now, again, the four have largely kind of integrated into local communities by necessity, even if not by desire. So again, they do have kind of a slightly more, urbane idea of cultural interactions and social interactions than their ancient ancestors would have. The people who lived with the cave bears. Of course, even 2 days later, some of my wording is very cringy. This is not an edited document, so anyone happens to be glancing at it, this is not an edited doc. This is a raw document. What is everyone else up to? Anything of interest that they want to share or not? Or is this very much a lecture focused night, which is fine. I've been known to do that for a living, so I thought I'd bring some ideas to the table. And for everybody who's just tuning in, because again, I'm seeing a number of people just popping on now, which is great. Welcome and hello. Um, Growling through Uber Eats guy, yeah, basically, right? Our whole idea of tribal living is definitely different now. So those just tuning into this will be archived. This whole live chat will be archived for 2 weeks at the channel if you want to watch it, and then it'll be over on YouTube. Then there'll be highlights of it stored on the Twitch channel for a while. But yeah, and that speaks to our level of divorce. Like, it is funny, but it speaks to our level of divorce from natural world, where during the pandemic, and again, I live in an area that is at the same time very rural, but I live near a very affluent town that never ran out of toilet paper, and that I could have ramen delivered, well, maybe not to my door because I live a little bit about 8 miles outside of town, but if I went to my friend's house right on the outskirts of town, we'd have ramen in the middle of pandemic show up at our door. So again, yeah, I'm writing this from the perspective of a very suburbanized, lifetime suburbanized, urbanized person. I'm not really a back to nature survivalist, even though I'm very interested in people who do that. I'm interested in cultures who still live very close to the earth, whether you're talking about rural Appalachian culture, which, that's a whole another spiral we could go down in terms of discussing the modern expressions of these kinds of cultures, these kinds of tribal cultures, or Cajun culture. People who do live on raised shacks in the middle of the bayou and on alligators, and they're out there. Yes, they're popular on TV at the moment, but I years ago I met some people from the New Orleans area, but they didn't live in the city. They lived out in the bayou, and an interesting they were brewers. That's how I met them. So they were very interesting people because they were like, yeah, if you come down, we'll take you out to the bayou. Well, exactly. And I talk about this, and I've been in the reenactment world and the role play world, and and the medievalist world for a good part of my life. And whenever everyone talks about, one, how accurately they're recreating this time period, there are a few groups who do really hardcore stuff, like go camp on fjords with authentic gear in the middle of the winter, medieval gear in the middle of the winter. Yeah, that's hiking, hardcore Viking reenactment, right? Um, but I'm always quick to say, all of us, including myself, don't really have any idea what it would be like to live in one of these tribal cultures, where dire wolves and wild boars are real threats day to day. Not like this abstract monster in the woods threat. No, these are the real threats. These are the real thing. Yeah, seriously. Yeah, no, yeah, living with your youngest daughter definitely gives a bit of that experience. Just from the descriptions I have heard, it definitely evokes. I will use primitive to describe her. She definitely evokes the primitive in some ways. So that definitely gets you a little bit of the chaos. But right, aurochs. Well, yeah, so I didn't include aurochs, and I found that really interesting that I didn't include aurochs because I'm really obsessed with them. I'm really obsessed with aurochs, and I did not add them. And that is something that I thought about recently, but climactically, the megafauna that is most dominant in the part of the world right now that starts in, be closer to Savannah. And this area where these people live up in the North and West Mountains is the closest to like a conifer forest mountainous territory that the characters will have access to, at least to start. So yeah, I'm glad you liked it. Glad you liked it, Justin. Yeah, saving it for a supplement. You know, so I mean, there is a whole other part of the continent that this world does not have access to right now. It will eventually happen. I don't know if there can be aurochs there. I had, yeah, but it was funny because I'm working on the totem animals early this week, and I thought I don't have aurochs or similar wild bulls. Wild. I mean, I talk about the wild elk, and that's something that but even all those kind of traditional woodsy megafauna. I mean, wild pigs are everywhere, but like the dire wolves, the elk, and the bear, I talk about being now largely extinct, or at least scarce in this part of the world. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if the aurochs make the appearance because they were modern elk are terrifying. Modern elk are very dangerous. And I remember when I was very young, my father had a hunter friend who talked about almost getting killed by an elk while hunting up, I think, in Maine at some point. Like you're so afraid of bears or wildcats or, whatever. It's like you forget about things like elk that if you catch them and they perceive you as a threat, they will try to kill you. Yeah, there were. Yeah, exactly. There were giant elk. There were megafauna elk, and in fact, the one museum I went to in Trier, they had a horn rack from one of the megafauna elks, and it was several meters across. I don't remember exactly how big, but it's great because you round the corner to the Ice Age and Stone Age portion of the museum, and that's the first thing you see, and it's like, wow, boy, I wouldn't want to be the guy that has to hunt that to live, right? And let's talk about closeness with nature. Even hunting a wild pig. Now I do have German relatives who hunt, and they do still hunt boar, and they of course they do it with guns now and dogs, but it's still very dangerous, and people still get killed doing it. Not commonly anymore, but they do. So just imagine having to take down. Yeah, vids about plowing through 5 feet of snow. Yeah, unimpeded. Exactly. Yeah, it's a dire situation. Exactly. Yeah, having to hunt a boar with spears and knives. Good luck. That's why 10 of you went out, and if 5 of you or 8 of you came back, it was this big success. Oh, there's Nikki. Hey, how's it going? I haven't talked to you in a couple of weeks. That's funny how, because I know you're working now too. So I was just thinking, oh, I haven't seen Nikki out recently. Yeah, even right. Even not joking about the 30 to 50 feral hogs. Right. No, boar hunting is no joke. Well, they do down south. They hunt with a dog, hunt with a pit bull or a pit bull mix and a knife, and they usually carry a sidearm. They usually carry a 44 or something. To an acquaintance of mine who is a pretty primitive liver, and I think he wouldn't even care about that. Interesting character. Yeah, I like boar meat. I like boar meat. He doesn't hunt anymore. He hunted when he was younger. He's in his 70s now, but he photographs out in the wild of Montana, like wild, like goes into the woods now for 3 or 4 days at a time, all year round, and he's always armed. And I won't get into a firearms discussion tonight, um, but he is definitely one of those people. I do not blame him for carrying twin 44s, when he goes out hunting or he goes out photographing. He's like, look, they make me feel better. If I'm ever charged by a grizzly, I'm probably going to be dead, but they make me feel better. If I ever run into a cougar up close and I don't see it before it sees me, no matter what I'm carrying, I'm probably not going to be in pretty good shape after all. Mutton, mutton has to be prepared properly. Mutton is like goat in that mutton and goat are the two primary staples in this fantasy world. By the way, that in curries, it's fantastic. I've had mutton that has been seasoned with rosemary and smoked over a fire for 10 or 12 hours, and that was fantastic. That was at a medieval camp. So that was this great experience of, how to really make mutton. Yeah, that's the only way to do it. And I've cooked goat too. I've barbecued goat. And yeah, unless you get it out there first thing in the morning, just let it sit. Coconut curry goat. I have one. I don't know if Nikki knows of it. Neil probably doesn't know it, but there's this hole in the wall Indian restaurant up by Raritan Valley Community College that is on 22 that I stop out on my way home sometimes. And they're one of the few places around that does really authentic curries. I'm sure there are others, but this one I know. And it's this hole in the wall. You wait forever for your food, but they literally give you enough for 3 or 4 meals. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And in these cultures, um, it's called, let's see. Justin, yes, you're absolutely right. And I haven't even gotten into that this idea of hunting a cave bear for these people would be this rite of passage. Uh, Zaka, New Jersey. Here's the link. We've suddenly shifted from primitive culture and lifestyle to Indian food. There it is, Nikki. And anyone else who happens to be up in that area. And again, don't expect a fancy dining sit down experience. Expect like you're basically getting this food from someone's kitchen, you know. And sometimes they'll be like, "Oh, half hour," and you're there like 45 minutes later, and you're like, "I'm really hungry." But it's interesting that everybody who walks in there too, and everybody from other Caucasian dudes like myself, to people from the West Indies, to people from India and Pakistan, they all come in, and everyone's really friendly. And I've just sat there and just chatted with people. Well, and again, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of hunting and gun ownership, all those things here, because as most of you know, I have in some ways diametrically opposed opinions on this myself. Um, but I know people that do hunt for food, and I know people that in their lifetime, due to economy, have had to exclusively hunt for food, and I don't hold any ill will towards them. I have also known people or known of people who pay to go kill like a semi-domesticated lion in Africa, and I'm like, yeah, no, no, that's not, yeah, absolutely. And I think, okay, I even think that my primitive tribal culture, the Froor, would feel exactly the same way. That if you can't eat an animal, don't hunt it and kill it. Whereas the Hapshar will go out and hunt exotic game animals and just for trophies because they are the Harkonian, late Roman Empire degenerates. So they have that luxury of being able to do that versus a tribal culture that absolutely has to do that for food. Bow hunting is a totally different game. Totally different. I know people that do bow. I have up the street. I have a guy that is a champion shooter, circuit bowman archer, a bow yeah archer, and he does also hunt with a bow. He hunts with a gun sometimes. He hunts with a bow, but it's such a whole different game. A totally chill dude too. Totally cool guy. He has not the whole macho hunter guy thing. He's and most of the guys, actually the guys and women, because I don't put women who hunt around me too, that live in my local environment are actually very conscientious and respectful. They are largely people who grew up doing it, and it's not you know not just a sport, which is good, at least in my opinion. I think if you want to shoot a gun for fun, you can go to a range and do that. But to actually hunt other animals just because you can, I think unless you're gonna eat the food or eat the meat or use the animal in some way. That's true. Yeah, I'm pretty good with a bow. I used to shoot pretty regularly. I'm not bad with a firearm, but I'm actually much better with a bow. I do enjoy doing it. I don't get out to do it enough. What is your spirit animal token? Give four choices and take a poll and see if we can guess. So I talked about this a little bit the during the one of the chats, that I actually have some issues with this whole modern idea of token animals or spirit animals and totem animals in our modern context. But having said that, I have in fact done journey work involving animals. So here are my So if anyone wants to try to guess what I would consider, or what I would say is my totem animal, you can take a guess out of one of those four. But again, animals I like, animals that I feel an affinity to, are not necessarily what I saw when I did this journey work. And that's a really interesting story. I talk about it in one of the other chats. But what happened was really strange in a lot of ways. And again, I'm the guy that is quick to actually kind of dismiss all this, but in the modern context. But this was a really interesting experience with a fellow named Raven Grimassi, who's now unfortunately dead, but he's an author, a writer of things that are folkloric, specializing in Italian witchcraft. Now, the guy knows nothing about my family background when I first meet him, and I do this stuff with him. Yeah, I have two ravens. I have Hugin and Munion. But that's their forethought and memory, and they're on a tree of the Yggdrasil, which is the world tree. They're on a branch of the Yggdrasil, which is the world tree. So again, not necessarily what and again, because I happen to like ravens, and I have an affinity to ravens. I mean, I also have a snake and a vulture, right? A serpent and a dragon, serpent. It's the Aztec fire serpent, Zalcatl, and an African vulture. So again, any other guesses? Boar. That's the next most likely, considering I have quite a bit of boar jewelry and quite a few boar characteristics. In fact, my Chinese astrology is the boar is my Chinese astrological sign. But what I encountered during this vision work was a horse, but not even a horse. It was one of two things. It looked more like a mule, which was really confusing to me. But then other people said, though, your description of it, including its markings, sounds like a prehistoric horse. And what's interesting is that in talking to Raven about it also it spit on my hand. And that was really, this whole thing was really, really bizarre. And so what Raven said afterwards was, well, We talked about my family. He says, well, horses are really common in people with Italian ancestry, and spitting is very common in Italian witchcraft. And I was like, who knew? And then I said, and I think Blithwolf was on for this, that a few weeks later, then I walked into this kind of new age shop, this witch shop up in upstate New York, and the woman who owns it, who knew me but didn't know me really well, said, "Oh, there's something on the altar for you." I'm like, "Okay." She's like, "Yeah, go over, pick it up." And there was all this stuff on the altar, and there was this small stone of a prehistoric horse etching a petroglyph, like a mini petroglyph. So it was a really bizarre couple weeks. And I talked about this in one of the other chats. I had a bunch of really uncanny things happen that week, where I just was kind of like, all right, there's the moment of when I personally, my rational mind is saying, all right, this is goofy and coincidental, to then you just kind of keep seeing these things, these symbols recur. Are you looking for them more? Maybe, right? Maybe you're looking for them more. But the whole experience of the visioning with the horse was really interesting. But all the other animals I do actually have affinity to. Maybe not the buffalo. I threw that as the red herring. I mean, buffalo are obviously really cool, really interesting. I have no Native American. I will not even pretend I do. I know to Native Americans, Plains Native Americans, the buffalo is ultimately important. And in fact, the relationship I see with these cultures having with these animals is probably closest to that, in terms of seeing these animals as such an integral part of their environment that it becomes part of their spirituality. Which I'd argue that, to me, it's no coincidence that every one of the Scandinavian deities has an animal associated with them, or multiple animals associated with them. That's not an accident. This is not an accident. That animals were extremely important. Thanks, Jay. The horses are great. I love horses. I don't know horses very well. I've only been on a couple horses. I've been around horses a few times. I like them very much. But I never thought that if any, let's say, manifestation of whatever, either my subconscious or a spirit or whatever, were to appear to me during a vision, it would be something that was equine. Because I've never really thought about that. Well, I think it's natural. And I think this goes back to our whole discussion tonight of tribalism and tribal spirituality, in that I absolutely think that humans were at one time so deeply connected to animals, even if they hunted them, even if they were hunted by them, that they knew that they were inseparable from them. There are these Maltese rock paintings, these petroglyphs, that actually represent pregnant women with animals in their bellies. And these things are like, I don't remember the exact date. I'd have to look it up. I saw a great lecture on it when I was in Norway. But these are like, these are very old. I believe 20 to 30,000. I could be wrong. Could be newer than that. But I'd have to go look. But these are very old. And that just shows you that at least in some parts of our recorded history, we do not consider ourselves entirely separate from animals, and how important these animals were to us. And it brings up all kinds of questions, right? Was it totally symbolic, or did people think that they could give birth to animals? Or for some reason, did they think they had given birth to an animal? What folklore, what saga was being told by these people to the point that they carved in rock these images with, not with power tools, by hand? It was that important to them. What mythology, what cosmology did they have that compelled them to create those images? And they're fascinating. And they're definitely they're definitely on my list of 2C. Things I never thought I'd go look for. I mean, I've been to quite a few petroglyph sites, and I'm really obsessed with petroglyphs too, obviously. But but I never imagined that I would hear of one in that far flung part of the world that was just that strange and that interesting. Well, boy, that's a whole other take on this that I didn't even get into tonight. This idea of shapeshifting, this idea of atavistic resurgence of animal qualities. Nearly every tribal culture has this thought that maybe they wouldn't give birth to an animal, but maybe they could take on an aspect of an animal. And werewolves, we're pretty sure there's I'll call it the post Christian notion of the werewolf, in which they become intermingled with folklore of vampires, ghosts, ghouls. And in fact, all these creatures at various points, especially in Eastern European folklore, are the same creature. And also, strange enough, in New England folklore and in Louisiana folklore. The loup-garou is variously described as a ghost, a green light that inhabits the swamps, to a vampire, to a shape-shifting werewolf-like creature. So it's really, really kind of interesting that this sort of thing occurs again, and even in Cajun culture, which is not ancient. Cajun culture is relatively new in terms of tribal culture. They've created this whole animal mythology, which is extremely powerful, and people still believe it. Again, it's not now that modern city, modern world, no one believes this anymore. There are still shrines down in Louisiana to the alligator man. And the alligator man is thought to be the spirit of the swamp who protects people against the loup-garou. So it's really, really interesting how that ancient folklore that came probably from the French Acadians down to New Orleans, that the French had brought from Europe earlier before they settled in Canada, morphs. And it all goes back to some relationship with animals. And I'd argue, of course, that our modern idea of the werewolf is at that time, cityfied, Christianized response to this ancient folklore of shapeshifting and this ancient folklore of people who could become animals and people who could take on animal traits. And again, those people were around. We think of the berserkers, of course, but those legends are around in every tribal culture, or should I say pre-industrial culture. And in fact, I have it on quite good authority that even in modern Afghanistan, a place that we don't associate with this folklore, there is still quite an active belief and fear of tribal people who can become effectively werewolves. So much so that the South African military had extensive interactions and records with these people, and said that they would not go so far to say they exhibited anything supernatural, but some of the things they did not seem what they would have expected from an Afghan tribal soldier. So again, these mythologies and these folk, this is from the 80s. All right, catch you later, Wolfie. Speaking of wolves, Wolfie. All right, see you later, Neil. I'm going to be wrapping it up soon, too. But it was great. Thanks for coming in, guys. Thanks for everybody who chatted, everybody who lurked. Interesting topic. I'm glad I picked an interesting topic. It's not quite Halloween. We got into werewolves a little bit, though. So you got some werewolves going on there for you. But we will revisit all this as I continue my work on the folklore aspects of this game, which apparently is a big hit because I've had more sign-ups the past few weeks than I have any time recently. So I'll keep up that end of it, mixed in with some straight up gamer stuff, like problem players and problem game masters. We'll revisit cultural development and cultural diversity in these games too, because that's something I think there were a lot of people who couldn't make it that week, but they've said they had some interest in revisiting. Just for the fun, I'll put my Romans meeting the Gauls, which is kind of the crux of this entire, and a great inspiration for this concept and the clashing of these cultures. Well, yeah, and again, werewolf mythology, werewolf. Yeah. So I don't even want to bring this up, but so one of my big issues with all renditions of anything Tolkien, forget Rings of Power, but even Jackson's movies are the representations of the wargs. Wargs in Tolkien's world, they believe were somehow descended from Sauron's werewolves, or they were Sauron's werewolves. They're highly intelligent. They just happen to be in wolf form. They talk, they strategize, they're smarter than the orcs. So that's been one of my big, I have quite a few cringe. Cringe. The wargs in the movies were okay. They were more hyena like. And I was like, okay with that. Googly eyed wargs in Rings of Power, I was not down with it. I was like, I started laughing. Oh my god, he's got googly eyes. The warg has googly eyes. So that was kind of cringy. Well, hyenas. There's a lot of legends around hyenas in African culture and about shapeshifting and hyenas. And it's rumored that Shaka Zulu kept hyenas as pets and would feed people to them and believed that he could become a hyena and all these other kinds of things that yeah. It's fantasy. It's watchable fantasy. It's someone's D&D game, someone's very expensive fan fiction set in Middle Earth. Whatever. I mean, again, I didn't hate it. I actually got through it, and the end was kind of satisfying. The last two episodes were kind of satisfying. The end episode was there was some fun stuff in there. I was like, all right, that looks like something I would have done in a role playing game. Okay, I'm good with this. But yeah, overall, I'm kind of like, yeah, yeah. But as I've joked around with a lot of people, Tolkien's one of those few things that inspired me so much. Nothing that comes out is ever going to be as good as me reading it when I was 12, or 10 or whatever. So again, I am not the target audience. But okay, catch you later, Justin. So again, I didn't hate it, but I was like, there were definitely parts where I was like, ooh, that was a little painful to sit through. So again, for anyone who tuned in late or who tunes in late, from the Tomes, Twitch TV, from the Tomes, Fox and Board Games on YouTube. Hopefully, after this weekend, maybe I'll have even more custom content coming there. We'll see how it goes. Talk to my gaming group about it. Yeah, you got here a little bit late tonight. I'm sorry. Um, yeah, it's Wednesday nights are rough. Like a lot of people tune in, but I've had a lot of people say Wednesday nights really tough for me. I know during the week you're subbing now, so it's harder for you to get on here. Oh, you're out. Yeah, out shopping. Yeah, yeah. Like a lot of people actually made it on tonight, but a few weeks ago there was like 3 people, which was fine. But it's sometimes a rough night. Fox and Board Games, Twitter and Facebook, Fox and Board Games. And as always, thanks for coming on, chatting, lurking, following, liking, subscribing. Like my friend Lisanne of many years has her D&D game tonight, and she's like, I would totally be there except I'm playing D&D that night. She's popped on. She pops on during the week. She's an artist, so she's usually at home like painting or whatever, and so that's when she'll pop on and listen or chat a little bit. Well, I am planning on maybe starting up another evening based chat, so hopefully then you can pop on a little more. And when I'm ready to run some of these games online, maybe you can jump on with some of your crew. Though I don't know. They might not be into my gaming style. They seem to like a lighter style, a more fluid style, which is fine. By the way, in both the Discord that I have for Fox and Board Games and some other chats, other people have dropped some other project links. If you're engaged with any of that, feel free to check out some of their links. McNancy, who's been on during the week and was here last week, is working on his own game as well, on their own game as well. So, yeah. So feel free to jump on there and check out their links. If you have watched this and would like to jump on my Discord, it's pretty much open. You can shoot me a note and I'll send you an invite. So, all right. Until next time, thank you all very much. I really appreciate the support. I appreciate everybody coming on and chatting. and sharing ideas, listening to my ideas, and giving me feedback. I'll be on again tomorrow around noon. Until next time, have a great night.